welcome to Global Pay Fest 25, our 24-hour journey around the world exploring complexities and unique challenges of global payroll. We're taking you on a one-of-a-kind global payroll journey following the clock around the sun. We'll take you from Australia to Argentina in our 24-hour Global Pay Fest, covering the country-specific intricacies in tackling local legislation and equipping you with the knowledge to become a truly global payroll professional. I'm Alexandra, manager at JGA Recruitment and your host for this session, and I'm delighted to be kicking off our event Down Under. As multinational organisations to continue to expand across borders, understanding the payroll landscape in different countries becomes increasingly crucial. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Natalee Leach, Director of the Payroll Collective. Natalee, an Australian payroll expert with more than 20 years of experience in payroll leadership roles across Australia and Pacific regions. Natalee has transferred plenty of different industries across medium to large and often complex organisations. Her mission is to drive positive change through optimising people and payroll spaces everywhere. Having launched the Payroll Collective just under 2 years ago, her agency has grown exponentially to now have 13 consultants across Australia. Already this year, her team have enhanced payroll outcomes for more than 35,000 employees, processed 1.5 million pay slips, and supported large-scale HCM implementation projects for multiple clients. Natalee is making a lasting impact in the payroll space through innovation, expertise, and meaningful change. A little bit of exciting news also, both Natalee and her lead consultant have been listed as finalists in the Global Payroll Association Consultant of the Year for this year. So you are literally learning from the best. Natalee, thank you so much for joining us today to share your expertise with our global audience. What are some of the key things you want to discuss today around the payroll space all the way over in Australia?
Hello there from Australia, and I guess firstly, welcome to everyone who's tuning in, and it's Global Payroll Week. I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that there's about 3.3 billion people globally that are in some form of paid work in the world. That's nearly half the population. It's a pretty big number. So a big shout out to all those payroll operators who are often making it happen for everyone, giving them their paychecks so we can keep economies going, keep money in the wallets, keep paying the groceries, paying our taxes, all the rest of it. A big shout out to everyone here. So welcome. All the way over in Australia, it is a funny one, isn't it? Because ultimately, payroll is everywhere, as I mentioned, but today we're going to tackle some of the key themes and the key, I guess, legislative changes that are coming up in the Australian market. So, I look forward to sharing some of the insights with you guys.
Welcome and thank you again. And during our session today, as Natalee said, we'll be covering key Australian payroll challenges, recent regulatory updates, and best practices for multinational organisations, and there's definitely a lot of them. We'll then walk through a practical case study that demonstrates how to tackle complex Australian payroll scenarios, and finally we'll address some common questions that payroll professionals often encounter. So we're going to get started with Natalee's expert presentation on Australian payroll. Over to you, Natalee.
Thank you very much. Let me see if I can share screen. A little bit of an interactive one today, purely based on the fact that if you need to, take some images from these chats and relay them to your teams around the world, some of the stuff that we're talking about today is relatable everywhere. So with that, I will attempt to share. Give me one moment.
Thank you.
All right. Can everyone can see me, I think, as well. Is that right?
Yes. You're there.
I look like a little facilitator.
Yeah.
This is a bit of fun. Okay, well, today, obviously, I'm coming all the way from Australia to talk to the rest of the world around what is going on in the Australian payroll climate. I am the CEO and founding director of the Payroll Collective. With that, I'm going to probably jump straight into it.
Go for it.
A couple little topics, Alexandra, we are going to talk about today, and I totally expect that some of them will be a little bit of shock value, but I will try and allay some of these, the shock value that we will see today. We'll try and help everyone understand what this legislation means and how we can all start working with the legislation and enhancing our overall operating models. We will start with talking about some of the compliance penalties that were in effect for quite some time in Australia and around the country, not just in Australian law, but state and territory law as well. And then we're going to jump into actually what does this year's climate look like when it comes to penalties, compliance and legislation. We will talk about some of the upcoming changes as well to the Australian market, looking at some big things that are coming up as of the 1st of July and some of the other things that are really making a big impact and a big splash in the payroll world. And from there, we will start to look at how can we actually optimize our payroll and people operating models to tackle some of these significant changes that are about to take place in Australia here and beyond. We'll also have a look at some Fair Work enforceable undertakings. Maybe that might be a foreign word to everybody, but I will try and shed some light for the team here. And again, Alexandra, to your point, we'll be talking about some case studies, trying to get people thinking really critically about, well, what kind of case studies that you guys are seeing in reality, how you might blame certain areas and certain functions actually might not be exactly how it is in reality. So we'll be talking about that. And obviously, like any other presentation at the end, we're going to talk about some key takeaways, but more about how can we influence positive change in our industry. Payroll is often, a sector where we are not very well acknowledged in the market yet. To my point before, 3.3 billion people are paid by all of us in payroll around the world every year, nearly half the population. Okay. I always like to start off with this one because payroll is really about risk. Payroll's either done right or it's done wrong, but it's never a black and white answer. There is often a lot of grey, particularly in the Australian market where we have more than 4,500 enterprise agreements that employees can be covered under, plus 121 modern awards in Australia that people are covered under, which tells us and governs how someone is paid, how they will operate, what their job classification will be, and what their entitlements are. So with that being said, nearly almost 5,000, we were talking 4,500 and more coming every day. This world that we have is very complex, and navigating it is important. One of the things I always talk about is technology, and payroll technology is transforming the world, and it's certainly transforming the way in which we behave and interact with payroll in Australia. I think that with all the legislative changes coming on board, technology is advancing at a rapid rate. Yet, I want to be really clear here. When we look at this particular phrase from the captain of the Titanic, he was so risk ignorant when he looked at this. Never in all history have we harnessed such formidable technology. Every scientific advancement known to man has been incorporated into its designs. The operational controls are sound and foolproof. I often overlay that when it comes to payroll and systems. Sometimes we forget that we can't put all of our eggs in that one basket of technology and expect that it's going to be perfect every time without upkeep, without process, without people helping to maintain these systems and get the right outcomes. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. And this is purely about that iceberg effect that we talk about. When you are ignorant to risk, you've got no risk awareness, something's going to fall, something's going to fail. And obviously we all know what happened with Titanic, and we try and avoid that situation every time. I sometimes look at the submarines that went down, and they were also risk adverse and all the rest. It's exactly the same model. Hopefully no one passes away in these situations. However, it's a really serious thing, and there is a lot of penalties. Particularly in Australia, our government is extremely fierce on making sure that our employees are looked after, well respected, and are covered under law and are paid accurately, on time, and within the realms of legislation. So previously, not many people knew this, but there was actually civil penalties that could have been handed down. And recently, in the last few years, it used to be, well, prior to a few years ago, it used to just be the CFOs and the CEOs and anyone in that C-suite realm that would actually be able to be charged with these types of offences, whether in terms of the civil court.
They would take the brunt of it.
They would absolutely take the brunt of it. So then there's
Wow.
not as a payroll officer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a payroll officer, it's not a regulated industry in Australia. We are working to change that every day, but our people are often not trained well. They might make mistakes, but there is honestly no consequence. And now the laws actually changed recently where payroll officers were explicitly called out in the legislation to say, you too, regardless of who you are and what you're worth.
Name and shame.
Name and shame. So what that meant was, per serious contravention, it was $187,000 per serious contravention, and a penalty per contravention for an individual of $18,780. Those numbers were a wow factor to every Australian recently. But what I want to change to next is that as of January 1, most recently this year, so January 1, 2025, wage theft has now become a federal criminal law. So wage theft becomes criminal offence under federal law. Penalties for intentionally engaging in conduct that results in a failure to pay those amounts to or for the employee on the day they are due to be paid could result in prison time. If you look at those numbers there on the right of the screen, you can see that an individual, if they are known to intentionally, and I have put that purposely in very bold letters there, intentionally engaged in this type of conduct, you could be looking down the path of 1.56 million. Now, that is definitely almost double the median house price in Australia. And I can tell you right now that payroll officers around Australia are potentially not going to be able to afford that. It's quite a serious thing. When we look at jail time, it's huge.
That's,
What
puts
do you
the
think?
fear into people that obviously this has to be done correctly. And I know you mentioned as well that obviously they have to be intentionally doing things incorrectly, but still it's a lot.
It is a lot. And I think, I do have to be super clear here that it is intentional. It is, if someone has unwillingly made a mistake in their payroll processing and it has infected people and all of those things considered, it is unlikely that the government is going to pursue a criminal case against you. However, if there is an intentional, willful misconduct there, that it could potentially result in going down this avenue. So it is a bit of a scary time in the Australian climate. And I think I'm starting to tell a bit of a story here where you can start to see our organisations in Australia are starting to stand up and say, oh, hold on a moment, payroll's never really had a seat at the table. Payroll's never really been on the radar in terms of compliance, and is there benchmarking for compliance that we need to adhere to make sure that we're still paying people correctly, because there are these types of, criminal offences that could be happening underneath our nose. So it's certainly changing the way that we are today in Australia, and it's come on very quickly. Our technology has advanced very quickly, and there was a big scramble for our payroll people to be educated, building those capabilities, looking after our teams, making sure that they've got all the things and the tools that they need to be able to pay people effectively.
Thank you.
All right, what's next? So I did mention I was going to call out some of the Fair Work changes that are coming up or have already come into existence. So more recently, the Closing the Loopholes Bill, it's really interesting the way we name these things, but to its effect here, what we can see is there were loopholes. There were specific areas of legislation or gaps in our legislation that made it difficult for employers, employees, contractors and the like to navigate the myriad of different types of legislation, different acts about different things. So there was a tightening of those realms very recently. And out of that, some of the key factors that we found were that employees will now have the right to disconnect. I will go into that in a little more detail in a moment. There is more clear, definitive clarification around what an independent contractor is. There are certainly blurred lines between trying to establish a contractor who would typically provide an invoice for payment for works rendered versus an employee who works and has all of the entitlements such as superannuation, penalties, and all of the enterprise agreements and modern award, legislation around that as well. So they certainly have tightened the reins on that whole piece, makes it very clear, makes it very difficult for employers to make a mistake, but also closes the loop on those employers who have been a little bit sneaky around the other years here where they've maybe not mentioned that a contractor should be deemed an employee in previous years. Again, just to follow on from that, there are casual worker definitions now, and it's made it very clear that you cannot, mix up between what is a casual worker and what is not, such as the regular rhythm of work and all the rest of that comes with it. There are labour hire changes. So this is interesting. I know we're on a recruitment webinar today with you guys over there in the UK. Labour hire changes actually now demand that if an employee is working, if the labour hire employee has been asked to do some temporary work in a location, they must be paid the same amount and the same types of penalties and overtimes and all the rest of it as an employee would if they were an employee. So I think that's only fair and reasonable. Hence the Fair Work Ombudsman has probably done the right thing there to make sure that people are treated fairly in these workplaces. They've also, obviously, as I've touched on before, the wage theft becomes a criminal offence. What are your thoughts on that, Alexandra?
I mean, they're obviously putting things in place to make things, I guess, transparent, which is great because it's going to make it hopefully easier for people to avoid imprisonment and horrendous charges like that. So it's good to see that there's lots of, I guess, changes being implemented to kind of move with the times, and the detail that's involved around all these areas is, I mean, I'm kind of sitting here thinking, trying to process it myself.
If you look at it, like I've just gone back one slide, I certainly think we are, leaps ahead of anyone else in the world when it comes to these types of laws. Our government takes it seriously. And I think the historical issue, like I mentioned before, has always been around payroll has always been processing. I mean, just as much as 10 years ago. And in some cases, some of the clients we work with now are still processing manual timesheets. So as you can imagine, handwritten timesheets have to be a thing of the past. There is so much rigor. There is so much more of a requirement to make sure that you're recording time appropriately, you're recording breaks and all of these things. If we don't record anything, then we can't prove our innocence as employers.
And so I was just going to say, it kind of leads on to what you mentioned about upskilling the employees, because if you're working in payroll and obviously all these legislation changes, those people have to be upskilled as these changes are implemented. Otherwise, the whole industry is struggling. So whose responsibility is it to make sure that they're upskilled?
Yeah, so this is something that my team is certainly working on in the background. We work closely with all of the different types of consultants around the country because we're all faced with the same issue that, we've got teams that are either burnt out from these changes and the quick pivot to say, well, hang on a minute, you've got to get better systems, you've got to get better processes. It has to happen now. There's a journey for that to happen, and our legislation has, jumped in quantum leaps. Our technology that we are leveraging off today has absolutely intensified in its ability to automate through artificial intelligence, or even just its ability to maintain compliance is still really tricky, but it's moving at
It's a journey.
but our people are still humans.
Yeah.
And with, you know, as you can appreciate, Alexandra, in our world over here in Australia, it is not a regulated industry. We're working every single day to try and change that, and it's absolutely my mission. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but absolutely my legacy is going to be to try and change the payroll world for the better, and make sure that payroll is looked after. And by that, I mean the people, that we have the skills, the tools, the capability, we have the systems, the technology, the processes that are able to combat and make sure that we are complying.
People are going to look back in years to come and go, who's that Natalee Leach that did all these wonderful things? She's a superstar in the payroll world.
Well, I hope so. People often think that payroll is, you know, just a numbers game, but absolutely it's not. There's so much change across the world to be had, and it's all of the positive stuff. So we'll see how we go. I don't know if I can make any promises of changing the world, but I will try.
You'll be putting it onto your children.
Bring my kids up. I often joke when I do all these other guest speaking events is that no one ever, when they were 5 years old, sat in their classroom for the first time. And when the teacher said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I did not put my hand up and say, "I cannot wait to be a payroll officer."
I'm going to be a payroller.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just obviously it's not something that we ever think about, but for me, it's my dream, it's my love, my passion, and hopefully we can make a difference. So we'll see what's on the next couple of slides. So we were talking about the closing the loopholes bill. That was definitely one of the most major change that's happened recently. But one of the things we talk about is right to disconnect. This was a really interesting piece of legislation that came about. And again, it's about what is fair to employees and reasonable. So what this now means, and I will read it out, is that effective from the 26th of August last year, but we've had a bit of leeway for some of these small businesses, eligible employees will have the right to disconnect when asked to do things outside of their working hours. What does that actually mean, I guess, in reality, is that employees have the right to refuse contact outside of their working hours unless that refusal is unreasonable, which I guess can be open to interpretation. But when we put the payroll lens over that, it becomes a little bit blurry. So when we look at, for example, the EFT file needs to be released at exactly 6 p.m., which is outside of this person's regular hours at 5 p.m. Is that reasonable? I guess it's not up for me to say. I'm not a legal practitioner, and I'm also not there to vilify, but there is obviously some gray areas there about what is deemed reasonable and what's not, because for a payroll person like me, there is no payroll left unpaid. I will go to the ends of the earth to make sure a payroll is unpaid. But if it's reasonable, I can switch off. So there is some interesting clarification points of view there from a payroll perspective. But for example, if my boss calls me on a Sunday, there's no payrolls due, and they say, urgently need you to log in right now and write this report for me, potentially that might be an unreasonable request as it's outside of my hours. So this is interesting. It's just giving a little bit more power to our employees to make sure that they're being treated fairly. And it's great. Right, what have we got next? Compliance and enforcement, and then there's some upcoming changes. So this is interesting. I know everyone's probably thinking, all right, well, what's coming up in Australia? What's going to change everything? We've had a lot of, scary legislation changes recently with the fact that we can, there's criminal offences that can be handed down. But now we're going to look at parental leave. So we do have a parental leave scheme in Australia, which is fantastic. Our government do, subject to eligibility, pay for a worker who has had a child born or adopted, and they do have an entitlement to some paid weeks maternity leave or paid parental leave. But from July, you'll also be allowed to have 12% super paid on top of that, which is fantastic. Historically, ordinarily in Australia, we have superannuation that's paid on most of our ordinary time earnings, or all of our ordinary time earnings. It doesn't include overtime and other things. So it's always been an interesting fact that paid parental leave, even though we've got a great benefit here in Australia that we get it, that superannuation wasn't paid there either. And we do need to look after our future interests. For those that aren't sure, your superannuation is like a pension scheme. So when we do retire, we are able to, I guess, gain those funds from our super accounts to then fund our retirement once we finish our working life. Over the last couple of years, we've seen different types of increases to our superannuation guarantee. What that is the compulsory employer superannuation guarantee contribution. So as an employer, you must pay 12% of ordinary time earnings from July 1, previously up from 11.5, which was 11 the year before, and we've seen a steady increase. 12% is pretty much the last of the forecasted or the budgeted and agreed upon changes that we'll see for superannuation. However, for those that don't know, there is a federal election about to take place in Australia, and who knows, either side or either parties might come to the table with something new as well in the coming years. So we'll watch that space carefully. One thing that is scaring payroll system vendors at the moment, so if we're even talking HCM, ERPs, payroll engines, global, local, it doesn't matter. The government have announced that every time you pay someone from the 1st of July 2026, you must pay super at the same time. This doesn't sound like a big change, but historically in Australia, we've actually had superannuation doesn't need to be paid until the end of each quarter, usually the 28th of the following month at the end of each quarter. That gives payroll teams time to reconcile, gather all of their contributions, and systems and design and technology has been built upon those foundations. There is no ability at the moment for a lot of our systems to click a button and send superannuation the minute the EFT goes out. So whilst we've got this deadline of the 1st of July 2026, we are hearing that that is not going to change. So solutions and vendors and a lot of our technology partners are racing around the clock trying to solve this configuration item in their technology to make sure that it's ready, tested, suitable, and that our payrollers are trained in how to navigate these changes too. Any questions, Alexandra? I feel like I'm just speaking to you, but soon we'll be broadcast.
There's so much, and I think that the last point you mentioned there as well is then, as I said before, making sure that the payrollers are skilled to go live with these changes. It's all well and good these changes kind of being implemented. It's like, well, they've got to learn and roll with it at the same time. So it's a lot for everyone that works in the industry to take on board.
It is, and I think back to quite a few years ago now, that single touch payroll, which is the name of basically the data sets that are sent over to our Australian taxation office every time we remit an EFT or a payroll. When that came into play a little while ago, a lot of our system or solution vendors had to actually get extensions or seek extensions from the government because their platforms just weren't capable and weren't ready to adopt the changes that the government were racing to implement. And whilst that seems like such a long time ago, I'm getting the sense that payday super is hopefully not going to be as big as that, but we'll have to watch this space. But it's there, and we are told that potentially it won't change. And to that effect as well, we've got the federal election coming on board. So trying to get any information out of the government right now, our government is in caretaker mode as we navigate the campaign here in Australia. So we'll have to wait and see in a few weeks' time once the election's over.
I was going to say, so the election finishes in a couple of weeks.
Yep, so look out, we might have some more information in about a month's time.
We'll do another webinar in a month's time and we'll update you all.
We'll have to have a follow-up session. Yeah. All right, so I want to talk about Fair Work enforceable undertakings. So quite a long time ago now, there's basically a Fair Work undertaking is a legally written what have I got here? I've written down the actual definition because I have to be very clear with my words. It is a written commitment, legally binding from an employer to take action to address failures or defects relating to workplace laws. In effect, it's an agreement between the government and the employer to say, hey, I've made a mistake. I've underpaid my staff by X amount of dollars. We are looking to do this and this and this to rectify the issues. What the enforceable undertakings actually does, though, is they have the ability to name and shame. And on our Fair Work website, there is a list of all of the organisations around Australia who have unwittingly fallen part to this. We say unwittingly, but they do need to go and take action quite seriously and make sure that they are mitigating some issues. One of the things there, you can see Suncorp organisation, $32 million worth of underpayments across 15,000 employees. And what that related to is incorrect and inconsistent application of enterprise agreements. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia was 16 million, covering 7,400 employees. It was definitely the largest underpayment in history, which was more than 10 million. I can now say that as of this year, these are probably last year and the year before, as of this year, universities are the target of the Fair Work Ombudsman at the moment, and they've not shied away from making sure that they're clear that universities are definitely an industry that is not necessarily paying people correctly. And so they're looking at this industry and trying to make a positive change to address some foundational issues, to address situations to make sure that we're not overpaying or underpaying people in the future. La Trobe University, University of Sydney, University of Melbourne have all been declared as having agreed to an enforceable undertaking this year. La Trobe has got, I think it's $10.77 million worth of underpayments that they are committed to going through remedial and making sure that they plug the holes and fix everything to make sure they don't do it again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Big money. So
big money, but it's a great thing that our government are really standing up and forcing our employers to do the right thing. I think that because, as I've mentioned before, there's been, a lot of payrollers have always done the best that they can possibly do within what they've been given to do. I think that, the last few years have seen a huge spin. It's been a full circle around the fact that
there's no hiding. If you're not doing something correctly, there's no hiding.
There's absolutely no hiding from it now. So, I'm going to keep moving along because these are issues that everyone can go and Google and research themselves. That brings me to a little video. I think I've been talking about some heavy stuff. I thought I'd break some ice here and jump to a very funny risk moment in time from Seinfeld.
Listen, I gotta get some reading done. You mind if I do this here? I can't concentrate in my apartment.
Risk management?
Yeah. Steinbrenner wants everyone in the front office to give a lecture in their area of business expertise.
Well, what makes them think you're a risk management expert?
I guess it's on my resume.
All right, now that I've broken a bit of ice with everyone in the room, we don't have to talk about all the compliance and the legal jargon and all of the things that make our job a little bit scary. We're going to jump into how we can actually adopt an optimized model to help us drive some positive change. This is not just for Australia. Payroll is everywhere, and typically it's a similar model. You could adopt this with everywhere you are. But at the Payroll Collective, we certainly think, and everyone's got their spin on these things, but we are absolutely, it's a part of our foundation that we believe that an optimized people and payroll model is 4 things. Compliance and governance relies on your people, process, systems, and integrations working in harmony together. Just like, Alexander, I'm from Australia. I'm going to talk about the fact that if you've got too many people and your integrations aren't very good or your processes or something else, you've got an AFL football and an Aussie rules football. And if that is on a tire of a car, it's not going to go very well. You're not going to be able to even bounce that footy. It's not going to roll well. So we talk about having equilibrium across all 4 of these quadrants. This is what makes an effective model. If you have too many people in the pits of data doing this because your systems are antiquated and aren't up to speed, or your processes are too arduous and don't serve purpose and giving value and meaning, then there needs to be a change made. Right, yeah, so to pay the right people correctly and on time efficiently, you need to see a balanced approach across all of those elements, just to my point. All right, I'm going to jump into a case study now. I've got a couple of case studies. We'll see how we're going for time. This one is purely about integrations. So it's one of our 4 pillars that we discussed just earlier then, and I'm going to walk through this one with you. A new HCM system was implemented to assist with the expanding business and high growth trajectory. The HCM system worked actually really well, but they needed to build an integration into their payroll solution. At this point in time, the HCM didn't offer a payroll engine, so an integration needed to be built to transfer and migrate employee master data from the human capital management system into the payroll system. Once live, actually, key point, the integration was very complex and took 6 months. But once live, the integration failed. It failed on numerous occasions, resulting in overpayments and underpayments, and required a further 12 months work and significant costs, blowing out into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. What we can say about this case study is that the HR team and the IT teams were responsible for the project. The payroll team weren't involved in the design of the integration, and payroll were only required to perform user acceptance testing of the integration, which was held just before go live. The scenarios used to test the integration were designed by the payroll team, and they of course passed. It's an interesting one. All right, we're going to jump into this now. And as you can see here, we've got our 4 pillars: integration, people, and process. What's really interesting is it's not the integration that failed. The integration is fully capable. And it's an interesting fact. You know, we could have built this well, but we didn't have the right people in the room. Payroll were not included at the right time, at the right place across the journey. I mean, Alexandra, have you heard about this in your realm over there in the UK? Is it a similar theme?
I mean, definitely. And I've had conversations with clients that have been going through projects, and I think messaged one recently saying like, oh, like you're ready to kind of go live, and they were like, no, we've had to pull it like right at the last minute for kind of complications, and probably the best thing to do otherwise would have been perhaps in a scenario like this, and it was too risky.
Yeah, 100%. It's too risky, but they went live. So I think what's really important about this is not to blame technology all the time. One common theme we do see here in Australia is it's not just about the technology can do a lot of things these days. It's transforming the way that we operate. A lot of our system implementation consultants or vendors will do anything to meet a business requirement. And I'm probably going off a bit off topic here, but what I must say, if a business requirement is to fit 1% of your work population, is it right to overcomplicate or customize your system build? Probably not. We need to start thinking practically about if we overcomplicate our integrations, if we overcomplicate our systems and our solutions, we actually might be bitten once go live happens, that things start to break, or that processes and people can't keep up with the complex configuration or the process requirements to keep it maintained. It's a bit of a sidestep there, but it's definitely a common theme we see. So if we jump back to this integration piece, processes, it says here, the team set about the design, build, and testing the system as the integrations and went live by the expected date. So honestly, the process of the project plan, it was fine. There was nothing wrong. But the key testing scenarios were missed because there was a huge gap in knowledge and training. The payroll team weren't involved at the build of the HCM. They didn't understand the data sets that needed to be migrated. And yes, it was a bit of a fundamental failure, that one.
Yeah.
All right, what have we got next? Payroll tax. So For those that that aren't aware, across the globe, payroll tax is a tax that each state and territory in Australia like to charge employers for having offices in their state and territory. Essentially, they want a piece of the tax pie for the wages and the earnings that your employees and your contractors and your directors are paid throughout the year. So in some cases, it can be anywhere from 4% to 7%. And I'm not going to rattle those off, but we can look those up later. But essentially, that's what it is. And typically, those calculations at the end of the year can be quite challenging and complex to understand. It does require a little bit of, I guess, amazing payroll talent to understand what does need to be subject to payroll tax, going through your system, looking at reconciling everything that's been paid across the year, and then lodging that and submitting that for each state. If an employer has multiple employing entities, you will have to do that multiple times for every state.
I was just thinking, if obviously a business is across the whole of Australia, there's a lot of complications along the way.
There is, and with this one, I mean, years ago, I remember having to submit 54 different annual reconciliations for one group employer who had multiple different entities,
Wow.
I guess, grouped with them. So yes, they're trying. I think there's this piece of every payroller in Australia will talk about harmonisation, that we want work cover, rateable remuneration harmonisation, and payroll tax harmonisation. It would make everyone's jobs a lot easier if they all just sat together and made it clear that every state and territory had a unified idea on how they're going to comply with things. Not only that, long service leave is a leave entitlement in Australia that every single state and territory have a different legislative act and different methods of calculation.
It is, that's crazy. And does it differentiate quite a lot across the states? Are there any states that kind of vary the most?
It's all different. For example, in South Australia, you will get 1.3 weeks for every year of service that you are with an employer, that you can't get that until you've reached a certain years of service. In Victoria, it would be 0.8667 weeks for every year of service, and you're not entitled to get that until after 7 years. Every single state is different, even depending on the reason that you might leave an employer, such as ill health or medical reasons. In New South Wales, you may be entitled to get your long service leave earlier. It's yes, I have a matrix, and it's extremely large. That talks about what types of things constitute towards the calculation of long service leave.
Wonderful.
But to that point, actually, there are a few operators in the Australian climate, organisations such as Yellow Canary or Paid Right. They're leading the way in helping organisations understand long service leave and actually helping to facilitate calculations that typically our global solutions haven't mastered yet. So there's certainly, I guess, organisations here. We're all trying to make a difference. Everyone here in Australia is trying to rally with technology and ways of supporting our employers being compliant with all of these elements too. We segued again.
I know. Let's go.
I did joke with a few people that I'm presenting, and it was 24 hours. It's a 24-hour thing. We're doing 24 experts, 24 countries, 24 hours. And a couple of them joked and said, you'd be pretty fine to talk.
You could. I mean, I think we would have no problem. I could definitely go for for 24 hours. Don't worry about anyone else. I've got this in hand.
It is 7 p.m. here on a Thursday, just before a public holiday. So, I'd probably need a wine if we were going to do that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, let's get stuck into the second case study, and we're talking about payroll tax compliance. So the payroll tax, lodge payroll tax each month. The team were highly skilled. Their experience, the system was configured when it was first introduced to calculate payroll tax, which is great. This system was awesome. It was configured. They paid taxes on time. The system was generating reports. They paid to those reports. But an audit concluded the company underdeclared their payroll tax, resulting in fines and penalties. And it was, quite substantial. Those penalties were extremely substantial. Let's have a look at the next slide to see what they could have done differently. This is an easy mistake for any payroller in Australia, is that in actual fact, it wasn't the system's fault again. I just want to be very clear. It wasn't the solution's fault. It was the people that did not review their process, did not review the configuration, which often changes. In this particular case study, it was pay codes, that new pay codes that were developed, that they forgot to tick a flag in the payroll system. And the state government, and any government for that matter, do not take lightly to these things. The penalties can apply as well in these cases. The process, the process did not include those controls and the governance that we need around payroll. Every quarter, every half year, every year, there should be something in your framework or your governance framework that says we need to look at these things, control them, make sure that we are actioning these items to maintain our compliance going forward. Integrations, there was none. Thank God for that. All right, what have we got next? I thought this was a really interesting one. I don't know, Alexandra, have you ever heard of boot before?
No, well, not, I feel like not in this term.
Not in this term, not the ones you wear on your feet, right? Absolutely.
If you're given the boot.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, we'll get given the boot, or the boots on our feet, 100%. This particular one was an enforceable undertaking. Best and Less is a big retailer here in Australia, and it was one of the more significant retailers that were sort of named and shamed a few years ago. It was a $5.2 million underpayment. It involved 686 employees, and it was about annualized salaries. So boot actually refers to the better off overall test. And Alexandra, I'm sure that in the UK, right, we have people that are often maybe paid a higher rate than, say, the minimum wage.
Yeah.
So what this refers to is, let's just play out a scenario here. Just say I'm in the UK, I get paid $30 an hour, but the minimum wage is 25. I'm paid above, right? So but my normal hours are, say, 9 till 5. That's all good. Everything's tickety-boo. Across the year, though, at my rate, I'm not getting any penalties. So at $30 an hour, I'm not getting any weekend rates. I'm not getting any evening rates, early morning shift rates. And I might have been asked to work on a public holiday, or I might have been asked to stay back quite late hours across that year. What the boot is a process by where we look back across the year and we say, if this person was paid $30 across this whole year, what if they were paid the minimum wage and they were entitled to some of these penalties and overtimes across that journey? Would they have been better off under that?
And if you weren't, that's when action.
Exactly. Yeah, that's when you have to top them up. So a lot of our modern awards these days, particularly the retail award and a whole lot of hospitality award, a whole bunch of awards here in Australia have what's called the better off overall test. And if they don't have that, there is some element of it in other ways and practices. In this particular case, the store managers and all the assistant store managers, they were applied an annualized salary, but the boot test wasn't done. These employees on occasion work different stores, exactly to my point there that we were talking about, Alexandra, and that they weren't compensated for them because they were on a flat fee, like a flat rate per year. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to use our operating model really quickly to see what they could have done differently to make sure that they were meeting their compliance requirements for this. In the people element, looking at ensuring employees who create contracts are skilled in understanding industrial instruments. This is all what I keep talking to you about, Alexandra, that we need to make a big difference in how our payroll people, our HR people and our teams are trained and continually upskilled in this space, right?
And I think that's something that we're working in recruitment. That's something that we come across ever so often, is that testing the existing teams, identifying skill gaps, upskilling them, and that should be an ongoing thing and something that's proactive rather than just reactive when there's a problem.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think while I can sit here and talk to the Australian climate, we've had some absolutely transformative change in this, the legal elements of how we are governed in payroll. It's actually a really similar theme across the world. Every area that you go to right now, payroll is a hot topic at the moment. There are compliance issues everywhere. There are people that need to be trained. This is not something new, but it's something that we do need to take a stand on and actually acknowledge there's a problem, right? Then we need to acknowledge the gap. Process, undertake the boot regularly. Again, have that as part of your governance and your controls around making sure that boot is either regularly done. In terms of our technology, a lot of our new technology these days can facilitate the automation of boot, which is pretty amazing considering how complicated some of our enterprise agreements are. I looked at one yesterday and one was 128 pages and was written across a period of 30 years. So you can imagine the complex requirements and interpretation elements that these things have to happen. What we often say to employers from our consulting lens here is that if you are going to annualize someone's salary, make sure that you pull together scenarios of exactly what you want that worker to be doing, those hours, and start to simulate out and forecast out what you think, making sure that there's a buffer. So for example, if you work out that the minimum rate is $20 and you're paying someone 21.2, there is not much buffer there for that person to do any hours outside of regular ordinary time. So we do a lot of work with helping organizations make sure that they're fit for purpose going into the future for these salaried and annualized salaries. Systems, automate, as I mentioned, review your configuration regularly, and integrations, whilst it's not directly related, it is important to regularly test those integrations to ensure that rules and pay codes are mapped correctly. I've talked a lot. I don't know how we're going for time, but how are we going for time?
We're probably going to move on to some questions soonish.
Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, depending on how you're doing, your end.
Okay, I've only got 2 more minutes left, so that kind of works in well.
Perfect.
Okay. So how can you, in the audience here today, how can you influence some change with your teams, no matter what you do? Optimize using our model. Happy for you to share that with your teams. Regularly assess that against the performance and effectiveness of your entire function. Build an internal risk framework. We talked about risk at the beginning, but everything is about risk, right? Every piece of payroll is about risk. If you want to get a seat at the table because you now have a right to be there in terms of the fact that there are wage theft laws that have come into effect here in Australia, then build a roadmap. Don't wait for someone else to. Be part of the journey, stand up and take action in your payroll teams and start to build together a roadmap and show that back to your senior leaders and get their endorsement and encouragement to go and get that seat at the table to make positive change. Continuous improvement goes without saying. I speak about it all the time. Partner with experts. There is a lot of organizations that do need help, whether it's building people and capability, but also if you need reviews performed, if you need auditing tools, if you also need to get legal advice. We have a number of different, we've got employment lawyers, industrial relation lawyers that are itching at the bit to be able to help drive positive change in this space for us in payroll. But lastly, it is about subscribing to some of the key legislators, such as the Fair Work Ombudsman website, the Australian Taxation Office website, and associations such as TAPS, which will give you regular newsletters and updates on what's happening in the Australian market as well. And that is me done. Amazing.
Well, thank you. Excellent update on all things that are happening in the Australian payroll landscape, and thank you for walking us through that. I'm sure many of our attendees have faced similar situations, probably wish they had you at the end of the phone all hours of the day in case they have any questions.
I do sleep. I do sleep. Not much, but I do sleep. I'm not thinking about payroll.
Exactly. Well, thank you. So I think we've probably got time now for a couple of questions. that I've prepared, and we've received kind of several questions from our community of payroll professionals about managing Australian payroll. So let's get going with that for our last kind of 5-10 minutes. So the first question I've got is around financial end of year. So it's coming up on end of June, so June 30th. What are some of the key items payroll should focus on to ensure a smooth end of year experience in your expertise?
Yeah, sure. It's almost like a quick sprint task list, I think, is probably some of the things that we rinse and repeat each year. So I guess one of the first elements is to make sure that, I mean, ultimately we have single touch payroll. We should be, because we are reporting to the government every single time we pay an employee, we should be maintaining those reconciliations week in, week out, every time we process pay. But of course, towards the end of the year, we do need to make sure that it is absolutely sound, that all our reconciliations, all of our payments have been recorded properly. Reconciling not just to payroll reports, it's reconciling to your financial accounts, it's reconciling to the balance sheet, it's reconciling to everything when it comes to the financial piece there. Finalizing your single touch payroll. So I say single touch payroll, I'm sure that there's some people in the audience that don't know. If they don't know, they can email me. I can send them a leaflet or something about it. But finalization of that is actually around making sure that employees, once you click finalize in your payroll process, that gives a worker their piece of paper or their digital piece of paper that they can go to their accountant to lodge their tax return. In Australia, our tax returns, when you're lodging them, you might be able to get a refund or you might have a bill, but there is that process that needs to happen. And workers are pretty keen on getting those as soon as possible. So we can't delay. There are deadlines for those. Reportable fringe benefits. Sometimes that gets missed because it doesn't seem like a payroll function, but it does need to go on income statements, which is that piece of paper, the digital piece that I'm talking about. And if that's not in your system prior to finalizing, it won't show up and it will cause you a bit of a mess. I guess in terms of end of year shutdown, every vendor and every solution, Alexander, is literally different. There are a set of instructions. There might be different sets of instructions every year. So make sure that you're reaching out to your vendors ahead of time. What is the up-to-date resource that you need to be able to facilitate closing down your system and your technology to open it up again for the first payroll of the new year? Typically, you have to go and load new tax brackets. The government like to change the tax rules here every year. So you will need to upload your new tax rates to the systems to make sure that we're taxing people correctly as well. I'm trying to think of anything else. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I'm thinking, oh, we've just had our end of tax year. Like, is there anything else I need to do? I think, am I going to get stung?
You'll be fine. Your payroll team has got this, right? Like, you can just come to work and you'll be fine. They're on top of it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The only last thing I think to think about is that in Australia, the government do increase the minimum wage every year, and it is always usually in line with the first full pay period or the first pay period in July as well.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so I reckon we've got time for maybe one more question. So, okay, so this is interesting. So what are the key compliance requirements for employing overseas workers in the UK, in Australia, sorry, employing overseas workers in Australia?
That is a really good point. So we do have the right to work legislation here in Australia, which basically says an employee needs to be have a valid right to work in Australia. So they must hold a visa, or they must be first of all, they must be a resident of Australia. If they are not a resident of Australia, they must either hold a valid visa with the appropriate conditions. Some of them can be temporary, some of them can be based on skills shortages, working holiday makers, student visas, and all sorts of things. So it is a bit of a myriad and quite a complex space to navigate. But we do need to make sure that in payroll, we are recording all of this information and that we do maintain and monitor the validity of visas. So if you're a resident of Australia, you're fine. You've got all of the different things you can go and work. That's all fine. But visas are something that often our payroll systems or our payroll people potentially aren't maintaining well enough to make sure that the people that are in your organization working and being paid are legally allowed to. So it's a pretty big call out. We have lots of different applications and tools in Australia that can help maintain and I guess ensure compliance with this space. But there is one other thing. If there is a skills shortage in Australia, there is the ability for employers to sponsor workers. It is at a cost to the employer, and the employer does need to guarantee or become the guarantor for that worker to say that they can work in their organisation. It typically is seen where there are worker shortages or is a specific skill that is not prevalent in Australia that is an absolute requirement here in Australia, and there's legislative rules around all of those.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I've got some friends that are over in Australia, and yeah, some of them are over there on skilled visas, and so there's a real variety of sectors where I guess there's a need, and that's definitely one way to kind of, I guess, move if that's the case. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
There's certainly avenues around, if you look at government websites, you should be able to find information on how to apply for visas, but it is quite a strict, a strict aspect in Australia. Yeah, I mean, Alexandra, you've spent some time in Sydney, haven't you?
I have indeed, yeah. I mean, I came over first of all on a holiday visa, and I was just holidaying, and then I was a student there for some time. So I was there on a student visa, and then there's kind of rules around that. You can only work a certain amount of hours, and it's super strict.
6 months, yeah. In some cases, some of our visas, if you need them extended, you will actually be forced into helping work in some of our areas where there is an absolute high demand, like fruit picking or vegetable picking. So it's quite an interesting landscape to navigate. I'm sure it was pretty tricky.
It is, yeah, it is. Well, look, thank you so much. I think in terms of kind of question time, we are almost there. And the complexity of the Australian payroll certainly requires a lot of specialised knowledge and careful attention to compliance. So thank you for going into as much detail as we could possibly cover today. So I guess as we kind of come to a close with our Australian session of Global Payfest 25, I want to say a massive thank you to you, Natalie, for sharing your expertise and insights. It's been great, very knowledgeable and fun as well. So the unique challenges of Australian payroll, from quantum leaps of legislation that govern how payroll operates, including the introduction of potential jail time, through to how we can enhance the payroll and people operating model to improve the payroll industry. These tips and insights are invaluable to our global and multinational organisations to assist them with navigating the global payroll space. So when it comes to payroll in Australia, it really can feel like it's upside down, but Natalie has certainly made things feel a little bit more manageable today. And to our audience, thank you for joining us for the first stop of the 24-hour journey. You don't have me and Natalie for 24 hours, unfortunately. I know, boo. But I hope you've gained valuable insights that you can apply to the organisation's Australian payroll operations or use whenever expanding into the Australian market. And again, thank you, Natalie. What a fantastic start to the first ever 24-hour Global Payfest. Hopefully we'll have you back soon, and
Absolutely.
Super excited for the upcoming sessions, even if you are in a tough act to follow. I feel like we are a tough act to follow. We've set the bar high with this.
Yes, I mean, let's drive some positive change in payroll. But look, I'm certainly going to be tuning in. I know that Switzerland, there's a whole bunch of different countries out there that I am super keen to hear about what's going on in their spaces too. So I'll be tuning in, and I hope that everyone else does too.
Amazing, thank you. And remember that all the sessions from the Global Payfest will be available on demand after the event, so you can revisit the content or catch up any sessions that you missed. If there's any that you've loved, you can watch it again and again. And yeah, before kind of signing off for the first stop of our global payroll journey, and please stay tuned for our next destination, which is Japan, which will be hosted by Freddie Morehouse, who is JGA's Recruitment Associate Director. So yeah, thank you, and we are done.
Oh my goodness, well done. Okay, what is it? Happy Global Payroll Week, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.